Hello and welcome back to Melee's Turnwheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem franchise chapter by chapter. I'm your host, Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to Chapter 5 of Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War. So, before we talk about anything else, I just wanted to get something out of the way. I noticed in editing the past few episodes that there's been a lot of background noise, the past two specifically episodes. There's a few reasons for this. Usually I'm pretty good about getting it all out, but especially for episode 5, I recorded that during the day. I'm also recording this one during the day, whereas I usually record at night. And I'm not that good at the audio editing thing if you haven't picked up on it, but also just, there's some of it that I just can't avoid. Like I live with a dog, and the dog is sitting in a chair across from me right now. And last time he was laying next to me. So sometimes it's just going to be noises of a dog, and it might be rattling tags or something like that. So I'll try my best to get it out, but this is just meant to be a little pet project that I don't want to spend hours and hours of my life recording and editing and making sure everything is pristine and perfect. It's just meant to be for fun. So forgive me if the audio quality isn't up to particularly professional standards. I do my best. I don't just rush these out without any thought to what it's going to sound like or anything like that. That's not the impression I want to give, but it's never going to be perfect. So I just want to make sure that is clear, that I do notice and I do care about the quality of these episodes. I just don't have my entire life to spend just, doing it. So hopefully that won't be too big of a problem this time around. And I'm having trouble kind of formulating an intro to this because, it's Chapter 5. Everyone knows Chapter 5. Even people who haven't played FE4 know about Chapter 5. It's infamous. So, I think there's not really any news to talk about. As far as I know, there's no significant milestones in the Fire Emblem community or whatever, and I don't really have anything going on that I am really interested in talking about, so I think we're just going to cut the bullshit and get straight into it. Very short intro this time around, and we're going to go straight into Chapter 5, Episode 6, Chapter 5, Threshold of Fate. So the introductory text crawl explains that Sigurd has a mission. He's going to get to Belhalla, which is the capital of Granvale. He's decided that he's taken the fight to Granvale, and he's done defending, he's done running, and he's just going to take them head on. Now, there's a few obstacles that stand in the way of him getting to Belhalla. The first of which is Langbalt, one of his worst enemies, Lex's dad, and he's captured a castle in southeastern Salice and is occupying it and has forces ready to take on Sigurd when he comes. Next up is Arvis's fire mages, who are positioned in the Yi Desert, which he has to cross in order to get to Belhalla. And then finally, Reptor and Arvis themselves, who are kind of the last lines of defense. The year, according to the text crawl, is Gran 760. And with that, Chapter 5 opens up. So the first thing we see is a knight who is apparently Byron. We know him from the text crawl, from the intro narration at the very beginning of the game, so we know what he looks like. And he has apparently been very wounded, and he's trying to get to Sigurd to get the Exalted Blade, which we know to be Tyrfing, to Sigurd. Now, Langbalt hears about this, he's talking to his men, and apparently Byron had been fleeing or something, or he had been in hiding, and his men found him and pursued him, but he got away. And Langbalt finds out about this and is freaking out, because if Sigurd gets his hands on Tyrfing, that's going to be a big deal, and Langbalt absolutely does not want that to happen. So he is very invested in getting Byron captured and killed to prevent that from happening. There's a little throwaway line here about why Chalfie, some people might have been wondering, oh, well, Chalfie Byron and Sigurd are in charge of Chalfie, shouldn't they be coming to help? Or did they go along with this? And the short answer that is given to us here is that Langbolt took an ambush and just wiped out all of Chalfie's knights, basically, which is really morbid, but that's what happened. Langbolt laments that his son, Danon, has not arrived with the reinforcements that he promised. Danon never actually shows up, and I don't know if this is talked about later. Danon's not important for this chapter, but, well, he kind of is in the sense that I think people might be expecting him to show up at some point, but he never does. But the important thing is that he is going to be a villain in the next chapter, so they name drop him here just to kind of have him in the back of people's minds. He's Langbolt's eldest son, so, what's his face? Lex's older brother, there we go. There's a bit of a conversation here between Langbolt and Andre, who we met last chapter, and he's Aideen and Brigid's younger brother, and it's confirmed here that he indeed killed his father, and Langbolt kind of has a moment where he shows contempt and disgust that he doesn't have any remorse over this, and actually takes a minute to pray. I guess pray is the wrong word, but he just says, "Lord Ring, may you rest in peace," which I thought was weird. The intro text crawl opening narration kind of described Ring and Byron as being kind of similar in their roles as advisors to Kurth, so I would think that Langbolt would want him dead just as much as Byron, but I guess not. Maybe the implication here is that Ring had maybe a different position, or maybe he just feels bad for him that he was killed by his own son. That's something that I think is, I think maybe he would not even wish that upon his worst enemy. Maybe he has a soft spot for Byron too, I don't know. There's nothing here to indicate that, but I thought it was interesting. Then we cut over to Sigurd's castle where he spots Byron, but he doesn't realize it's Byron. They just say that it's a knight, and at first they think maybe he's with the enemy, but then they realize no, he's being chased by the enemy, so that wouldn't make any sense. So they decide to go help him, and as a result also kick off the battle. They're thinking, okay, well, we might as well get the first strike in, because they're going to come for us eventually anyway, so might as well attack them while we have the upper hand. And that's how the map starts. So the first thing you might notice, and if you are one of those players that kind of does a sweeping overview of the map just to get a sense of what everything looks like, there's going to be something that you notice, possibly. Maybe you won't notice it, but I definitely think that it's something that someone could pick up on and maybe extrapolate some details from it. Belhalla is not on the map. Belhalla is not a capturable castle on this map, which kind of conflicts with what the intro was saying about how Sigurd was going to Belhalla, and maybe make someone think, alright, well, the last castle on the map is Velthomer, which is where Arvis is from. So obviously that's going to be the final area that Sigurd is going to have to do battle. What's going to happen there? What's going to be the story reason for why he doesn't actually have to capture Belhalla? I don't know. I think it could get people's gears turning. Like, that's odd. I don't know what's going on with that, but they might just see it as like a gameplay idiosyncrasy with the story or something. Maybe they just didn't want to have that many castles in one map. That's possible. I think the most we've had in one map is, other than the home castle, I think the most has been 3, right? And this would have 4 if that was the case. So they probably just don't want that. There are a couple of anti-turtling incentives here. As always, there are villages to rescue. And also, Byron himself is very much in danger of dying. He does not have a very advantageous position, so he can be taken down pretty easily, and you have to hurry up if you want to save him to get Tyrfing. He can actually die. I believe it does not give you a game over if he dies. I'm pretty sure Sigurd can just not have Tyrfing. And honestly, I don't think Tyrfing's even that big of a deal for Sigurd. I mean, it's only for one map, so I don't think it's going to help him all that much. But, I mean, it helps with Reptor, I guess, but we can talk about that later. This is a map where you're actually being attacked from multiple sides for once. I think the only other one that's done this in the entirety of Gen 1 was Chapter 3. 2 chapters ago, which is crazy. And even here, it's not done to particularly great effect. It's one group of enemies coming from one direction in the same area that you're gonna have to send people to save villages anyway. So it's not really something that you have to worry about. And even if you didn't care about the villages, you could just leave someone behind to guard the castle and they would be totally fine. They might take a while, but they would win, especially if they're using sword. Yeah, no problems there. So, not ideal. I would have liked it to be a little bit more impactful, but the nice thing is that if you're playing quickly, then usually they get to the castle right around the same time as Sigurd is repairing Tyrfing, so I like to use them as test dummies for what Tyrfing is capable of. That might be what they're intended for, I don't know, but wouldn't surprise me. Adine and Bridget have a conversation here. It's interesting to see that Bridget has really taken on her role as a member of House Ljungby because she's very invested in Andre here. They talk about Andre and how they've heard rumors that he has killed their father. And they're obviously very distraught about this, but I think more than anything, Bridget wants to kill Andre, not necessarily to avenge their father, but more so to restore honor to their house, which is something that, I mean, she's had a long time to grapple with this. It's been at least a year, probably longer now, since the end of Chapter 3, which is where we first met her. So, she's really accepted that this is who she is, and she wants to restore honor to her house by being the one to kind of get rid of her brother who has besmirched their name. A couple of turns in, we get another cutscene, this time between Arvis and King Asmer. This is the first time we're seeing King Asmer all game, outside of the opening narration, and it's only the second time we're actually seeing Arvis. Again, not counting the opening narration, it would be the third. So, these are some characters that we don't get a lot of experience with, so I like that we see them here. I was actually incorrect. In episode 1, I remember saying, I think we never actually meet Asmer at all. But that's obviously not true. We do meet him here. And Arvis has kind of been an enigma. So it's ambiguous as to what exactly he's been up to. So we get to see a little bit of him. And that's good. As I was saying last episode, I think that he should have been more focal in the story in general. So it's nice that we at least get to see him here. They talk about, I guess they explain how Arvis has been convincing Asmer that Sigurd is a traitor. And it basically boils down to he still has Shannon. And Shannon is a really big deal. I did not remember how focal his involvement with this whole thing was, because he's basically the leverage they use to convince the king and other nobles that Sigurd's up to no good. He's harboring the prince of our enemy nation. And that's a big deal. You know, that was something that Sigurd did in a moment of passion and compassion. Really backfired for him here. And I'm not saying it wasn't the right thing to do. I'm not saying they should have done something different. It just sucks that that act of compassion really came back to bite him in the ass. Just another reason, kind of what I was talking about a few episodes ago, where the theme of this game, or one of the themes of this game, just seems to be naivete and reckless goodwill can be punished really severely. And after this, it's revealed that the long-lost daughter of Kurth, that was mentioned last chapter, is actually Deirdre. Deirdre has returned, but she has no memory. And she was apparently left lost on the palace grounds with no memory, and Arvis found her and wanted to help out, just because he's a nice guy, but eventually he fell in love with her, and now they're going to be married. So, what's interesting here is that it's kind of ambiguous whether or not Arvis actually knows who Deirdre is, in more ways than one. And there's a few, I'll talk more about some of these loose threads as we go through the chapter, but there's a few, and maybe even some come up in Gen 2, where I think my personal take on it is that he knew that she was Sigurd's wife. And I don't know how he would know that, though, is the only thing. It's just some of his actions are so weird if he doesn't know that it just feels a little like that's the only way that I can reconcile it and have it make sense for me. But maybe that's not true. But it's very explicit that he did not know that she has Loptir blood. He did not know that she is his sister or half sister. So and he did not realize that their conception of a child would bring back Loptir. That is made very explicit later on. So it's left up in the air, and I think honestly up a little bit to our interpretation on what does he know? What's his angle here? And maybe that changes later on, maybe they make it clearer later, but I think that for right now we're supposed to just be like, does he know? Does he not know? What's going on here? There's a funny bit here, and this is a big nitpick, but it kind of lowers my suspension of disbelief a little bit. So the brand of Naga that we found out last chapter is used to identify her as Kurth's daughter is apparently located on her brow. So I'm assuming like the lower forehead, like between the eyes area, somewhere around there. And when I first read this, I was like, that's weird that Sigurd never noticed that. How did he not realize that that was there? Did he see it and just not know what it was? Possibly, but then would he not have started to put two and two together when he found out, hey, your wife went missing, and also at the same time, this long-lost daughter of Kurth was found, and she has a mark on her body that indicates her lineage, and Sigurd was never like, Deirdre had a mark on her body and went missing around the same time that this new daughter was found. He never puts that together. So my only assumption is that maybe he didn't see it, but then if that's the case, how? They were married for a very long time. They try to explain this away by saying that she kept the circlet, which is always in her inventory. You can't take it out. She kept the circlet over it, which makes sense on the surface. And I actually was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fair. But then I thought about it more, and I'm like, well, did she literally just never take it off? Did she never take it off while she was bathing or sleeping or anything like that while they were having, making selif, if you know what I mean? Like, just never? That's very odd to me. I don't know. But, again, that's a huge nitpick, and I'm not going to be that pedantic. I just thought it was funny and worth talking about because just the way that they kind of try to explain it away. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. No, it doesn't really, but whatever. It's not important. And the king, this is important, the king tells Arvis that their son will be the king, and in his place, while they wait for him to come of age, Arvis will rule as regent. So for all intents and purposes, Arvis is going to be the ruler of Granvale for a very long time. Oh, and there's another mention here of the fact that Naga Holy Blood is the only thing that can defeat Loptir. Just in case you missed that village last chapter, it's restated here, and it's probably going to be brought up quite a few more times over the course of the game. They really want you to know this. Cutting back to gameplay, Sigurd, at this point for me, talked to Byron, and Byron told him that Langbalt is the one who killed Kurth, and Sigurd says, oh, it's just as I suspected. Again, nitpicking, but it's a little weird that Claude didn't tell him this before. Or if he did, why did he choose that wording? I mean, I know the reasoning is that Claude can die, so that wouldn't make any sense if Claude had died before Chapter 4. It's still... Usually this game is so good about handling when the gameplay and the story don't quite line up. So it's weird to see them making so many mistakes here, but it's fine. Again, these are small things that I don't really care about in the grand scheme of things. And he gives Sigurd Tyrfing. Kind of. It's broken. And he has to go back to the castle to repair it. At this point, my Sigurd had, I think, 50k gold, so he was able to just get it all back. Which is nice. I mean, he didn't need it. I honestly probably should have not even bothered and done some inventory management instead. Spend some of that money on that, but whatever. Aideen and Claude have a conversation here if they are married. This is kind of the... I guess they realized that Chapter 4 might be a little early for Claude and Aideen to get married, so I think they decided to put it off until Chapter 5, their conversation. And Claude, I thought this was really weird. Claude basically spoils what's gonna happen. And I think it's okay because most people playing blind aren't gonna get this pairing. They're gonna get Midir or they're gonna get Jamk or Azel, because those are the ones that not only does the game give you the easiest access to because of like lover conversations, but it also are just the ones that they have the most connection with her, and people are just going to want to pair them anyway. My first playthrough, playing mostly blind, I paired Azel and Adine because I thought they were cute together, and little did I know that was a fucking awful pairing, but I paired them because I thought it was cute. So I think it's okay. I think it's acceptable to do this because most people aren't going to get the Claude Adine conversation until their second or third or fourth playthrough, if ever. So I don't think it's a huge deal, but I still don't think that they needed to spell it out for you this explicitly. Claude basically says, in the Tower of Bragi, I found out I'm going to die. And we're going to lose this battle, but it's okay because death is just the next step in our journey through humanity or whatever. He says something like that. And he also alludes to the fact that Adine is pregnant and that life will go on after he dies. And Adine is obviously very reluctant to accept this, but I think both of them have this connection of being religious, and I think that helps her sort of come to terms with it a little bit better than most people would be able to. But Claude is very explicit about it. He doesn't tell anyone else, but he tells Adine because he thinks that she has the right to know, just because they're married and he trusts her and wants her to know that he's going to die, but he doesn't want her to mourn. He wants her to understand that death is just another step, another path through the journey of life. And that's cool. I like that perspective. I'm not a religious man myself, but I do respect that philosophy and that outlook, and I think it really characterizes him well. I just don't know if they needed to, I guess, literally spoil the end of the chapter. I think they could have been vague about it. I think he could have been dropping hints that he was going to die and maybe saying, hey, if I were to die, that would be okay. And the player could put two and two together that maybe he knew. I don't think they needed to be explicit about it. But it is what it is. It's fine. I think it's a nice conversation. Arden has an event here if he's married, which is not true for me. I did not marry Arden, unfortunately, but if he stands in a specific spot, he goes on a monologue about how he is so happy, he has a wife and child now, and he just wants to do his best for his family, and it's fucking great. And I love Arden. It's a great capstone to his character, being left behind all of his life, never getting any attention. Then he gets that pursuit ring, and he's getting all the ladies. Everyone loves Arden. It's fantastic. He's great. He deserves the world, and considering what's about to happen to him, good for you, Arden. I hope that +5 skill lets you can't even crit. I was going to say land a crit on some enemies, but no, you can't even crit. He can vantage, so that's cool, I guess. Oh yeah, he gets +5 skill. I don't know if I mentioned that. I mentioned this a minute ago, and it's actually pretty easy to forget this if you're not paying close attention to the story. Lex is Langbolt's son, and you can have them fight each other. And they have some dialogue, and it's nice. It shows that Langbolt's a really shitty dad and was kind of mean to Lex all of his life. And he just, Lex has had enough and he just wants to put an end to it. Unfortunately, Lex does not stand a chance against Langbolt. I really wish he did, but no. He has a holy weapon. Langbolt has a holy weapon. The Hellswath, which is 1-2 range. I did make that mistake. I was talking about how tomes were the only 1-2 range holy weapons. This is another 1-2 range holy weapon, and it gives him +20 defense and +10 res, as well as having crazy high might, so it's really hard to get through his defenses without another holy weapon. If you don't want to test them, if you don't want to test Tyrfing out on the enemies attacking the castle, then this is a great chance to take Tyrfing for a test run, because he has weapon triangle disadvantage, and a holy weapon that will boost his strength so that he can get through his better defense and stuff like that. But you could also just take him out with Forseti, or in my case I think I used Ufel, so it's pretty easy to do. I mean, you just got to keep healing and make sure that you don't take more than one hit a turn, otherwise you die. He two shots, I think, pretty much all of your team, except maybe I think he two shots Lewin too. He maybe even one shots Lewin, but Lewin is pretty dodgy, so he might just not get hit. I took this opportunity to kill off Sylvia. If you remember last chapter, she got married to Alec by accident, and I want to play with her substitutes this time around, so I decided to just kill her off here. There's some ballista near his castle that I just had Sylvia stand in the range of, and she died, and I actually did not know that this game changed some characters' death quotes once they were married to incorporate the name of their lover. That's a nice detail. I actually never noticed that before. I do, in retrospect, wish I had waited a little bit, but it was fine. It's just Alec and Sylvia had a conversation later on, but I was just able to look it up anyway. There are a few villages. I think they're all before this castle, so I'm just going to talk about them all now. There were only, how many? Four villages that I made note of in terms of having interesting dialogue. One of them name drops Eldagon's son Ares, and talks about how he's going to have a hard life growing up without a mother and father. That's sad. I like Ares, and I did not even realize that they mentioned him before he was introduced in the story. One of them is more or less a pairing tutorial, and not a pairing tutorial. It's more of an inheritance tutorial, where you find out that moms pass items and qualities more heavily onto the daughter, and dads pass the opposite. They pass it more heavily onto the son. Of course, there are two pairings where it's reversed, but for the majority of the time, that is going to be the case. And it's just here to help you understand. I mean, at this point, I think people will have had most of their pairings made, so I think this is more to serve for the idea of, on subsequent playthroughs, oh, okay, I have a better understanding of how this works, so I can do it more effectively later. There is one that talks about how Granvale has really gone to shit and has just been attacking aggressively every country that they can get their hands on, which is notable because, honestly, about half of that was Sigurd. If you think about it, over the course of Gen 1, Granvale has invaded 4 countries. They invaded Isaac, Verdane, Augustria, and Salice, in that order. Sigurd captured 2 of those countries pretty much single-handedly. Granvale was not responsible for that. I mean, granted, it was in self-defense in both instances, but there came a time where you could have said, alright, maybe we should just pull out. Especially in Verdane, I think that once you got Aideen back, what was there stopping you from just pulling back, regrouping, and if they tried to attack you, just fend them off? Like, why did you need to capture all of Verdane? It just doesn't make any sense. And I think that this village serves to put into perspective, like, yeah, Granville has been going a little crazy and having, been doing a little bit of warmongering, but Sigurd played his role in that. And that's significant. That's not nothing. He was a part of it, and he contributed to the problem. And I think that's intentional. And then the last one is just about a resistance in Isaac that is holding out hope because they know Prince Shannon is out there and they really want to, they want to overthrow Granvale, or not overthrow, but take Isaac back from Granvale, and they think that Shannon will help them do that. That's just the setup next chapter. That's all. I just made note of it because it's kind of referencing some of the events that are going to happen next chapter. Once you capture the first castle, Sigurd decides that he doesn't want to have Seliph around anymore because he doesn't think that he's going to be able to take Seliph into battle, and there's no one to look after him, and he just wants him safe and out of the way. So he tells Oifi, I want you to take Seliph and go to Isaac, where you'll be safe. And Oifi is very against this plan. He hates it. He's like, no, I want to ride with you to my last breath. I want to be there for you. But eventually, he relents and decides to go to Isaac. Shannon pipes up and says, hey, I want to go too because Deirdre asked me to look after Seliph, and she's still missing, so she never told me to stop, and I want to keep looking after him. And he's getting a little hysterical about it, honestly. So Sigurd says, no, I don't want you going there. I want you to stay with me where I know for a fact you'll be safe, because he's not a literal baby, and I think Sigurd feels more confident in his ability to keep him safe. But Oyfi says, hey, I think Shannon also says this, and Oyfi kind of agrees with him. Granvale has control over Isaac, and Isaac is not going to be happy about seeing another Granvale person and the son of a Granvale noble. So maybe have Shannon come with me just to have someone to put a good word in for me to make sure we don't just fucking die. So Sigurd says, okay, you can do that, just be safe. And he goes off. And he apologizes, he says, Seliph, I'm sorry, and I have to wonder if maybe he's getting some bad vibes here. This is just kind of the bad vibes chapter. Everyone seems a little bit off put. There's something wrong here, and everyone sort of picks up on it, but no one can really quite put their finger on it. And you can see this progress as the map goes on. People start to get unnerved, and then eventually, at some point, people start like breaking down crying and telling their loved ones to get to safety. There's just something very wrong here, and it's conveyed well through the dialogue progression through the map. We'll talk more about that as we go through. Oh, Sigurd says, I wanted to make note of something that Sigurd says here. I can hardly fight with an infant in tow, he says. And he's right. I totally agree with him. And I could not even begin to imagine who would even think, who would even consider bringing an infant onto the battlefield. That would just be unthinkable. There's no way anyone would even conceive of doing something so ridiculous. Shannon says something really sweet here, where he says, I'll teach him all about Deirdre, which is just so cute, and contextualizes some of what Seliph must have been taught growing up. You know, like, you're the son of a great Granvale knight, and his kind, caring mother Deirdre, and Seliph must have heard those stories and really taken them to heart, and I think that Shannon was a good influence on him growing up. That's just the vibe I get from this. I'm reading too far into one line of dialogue, I understand that, but it's just sweet, and I like it a lot. Sue me. After we capture the first castle, there are some conversations here that I made note of. Du and Jamk actually have a conversation. Their first interaction since chapter 1, where Jamk set him free, and maybe regretted it a little bit, but Jamk basically tells him to get out of here. We don't want you here anymore. And Du says, everyone keeps saying that, and I don't get it. Something's wrong, and what is going on with you guys? Why are you all freaking out? And Jamk rather, kind of apologizes and says something's just not right here. And Du apologizes to Jamk for being such a pain in the ass, and they reconcile a little bit, and it's very sweet. I like them. Lex and Azel have a conversation where Azel tells Lex that he seems weirdly happy, considering that they just killed his dad, and Lex says, I mean, it's not like I feel nothing, but he was a real piece of garbage, and I didn't really have any sympathy for him. And Azel compliments his resilience, and says that he's really terrified of fighting Arvis. And he kind of explains that this is for two reasons. First of all, Arvis was like a second father for him. He never knew his real father, so Arvis being there for him as a father figure is a big part of why he turned into the person that he did. And the other reason is that he gets spontaneous bursts of change, where he feels like a completely different person, according to Azel. And this is never elaborated on, but you can only imagine that there's maybe a darker side of Arvis that we're just not being told about, we're not being filled in on. So, characterizes Azel and Arvis very well here, and Lex says, listen, it's your life, he's got his life, and I'm sure that he would want you to be your own person, or something to that effect, something sweet. Lex and Azel have a great relationship. And then finally, Sigurd, I didn't get this right away, I'm doing some stuff out of order here, but Sigurd has a conversation with Aira where he says, hey, wait a minute, I asked you to go with Shannon and Oyfi and Seliph to Isaac. And Aerys said, no, I mean, yes, you did ask me, but no, I'm not going to do that because I want to be there for you. I'm going to stick with you to the end because I feel like I need to see this through. And eventually I'll go find Shannon and we'll connect again. But for right now, I want to stay with you. And Sigurd thanks her and says that you're a really great person. Stuff like that. We get 2 cutscenes here, and I want to talk about them in reverse order because I think that'll help the thoughts flow better. So I'll talk about the second one first. Reptor is basically freaking out. Sigurd's come so far, basically saying, Arvis, you said that this wouldn't happen, you promised that you would take care of it, and, just generally being conniving. Arvis kind of tries to put his mind at ease and says, listen, you'll still get what I promised you. Your family, Frege, is going to be in control of Ostia, and Langbolt's family, House Dozel, is going to be in charge of Isaac. And we know that, at least for Dozel, that's true. I don't know that he kept his promise to House Frege. I don't remember explicitly in the story. I know you never fight in Augustria again, so maybe he did, and we just don't know about it, but all of their, the next head of House Frege is in, the Yi Desert and Manster in that area, so maybe not, I don't know. But he keeps his word to House Dozel, at least, for whatever that's worth. Reptor leaves, and in comes Manfroy, and Arvis gets kind of annoyed and says, listen, Manfroy, I said that you shouldn't ever meet me here because it's too easy for us to get caught. But Manfroy's here anyway, and he kind of asks Arvis, listen, you're not really doing the exact plan that we agreed on. We were supposed to just use these guys for as long as they were useful, and then we were just going to get rid of them. So why haven't you gotten rid of them yet? And Arvis kind of says, listen, I'm not going to follow your exact plan, and I want to change the world for the better, and I'm not going to bring about the resurrection of Loptir. He kind of says that offhandedly, almost like he's like, yeah, it's not like I'm going to bring your dark god back to life or anything. And Manfroy kind of menacingly says, oh, sure you won't, and then he laughs, or something like that. I don't know. I think he says something like, oh, yes, your son will make a fine king, or something like that. But kind of knowing what's going on, that's pretty obviously a reference to how Manfroy knows, and I guess this is where it's made explicitly clear that Arvis is not aware of the plan to bring back Loptir and is in fact actively against that plan, but unfortunately does not seem to be aware that it will happen anyway. The implication here is that Arvis doesn't want to bring back Loptir, but what he is going to do is stop oppression against the Loptir cult, which has been a big deal. It's something I've touched upon in previous episodes. Part of the reason why they're so desperate to get power back is because after they were defeated, they've been hunted and killed and executed. Kind of ambiguous as to who is being hunted, I think, and who deserves it, because again, these people did kill children and sacrifice children and kill a whole bunch of innocent people, so I'm sure some of them deserved it, but at the same time, I guess if they're kids and the generations that came after them were also hunted, then yeah, I could see why that would be pretty shitty. So Arvis says, as thanks for your help, I'm not going to oppress you guys. And he said it's a pity that Sigurd must die. So he clearly doesn't have any direct animosity towards Sigurd, which kind of further confuses the whole Deirdre thing and some of what we see later. He picks up that Arvis is scared that Deirdre's going to get her memories back, which begs the question, why? Does Arvis know that Deirdre isn't, is going to want to go back to Sigurd? Does he even know that Deirdre was with Sigurd? I don't know, but he doesn't have anything against Sigurd, so then some of the stuff he does later is kind of in question. I don't know. This is just a really confusing plot point, and I don't think it was communicated very well. I mean, I guess part of it being left ambiguous is intentional, but I think they could have, I don't know. Not a huge fan. It is important here to note, though, that he is genuinely in love with Deirdre, or at least he claims to be. So he's not just with her for his own personal gain. He did genuinely fall in love with her, and it's in fact implied that he fell in love with her before he even knew who she was. So that's nice. Okay, and now the second thing I want to talk about is actually the first cutscene we see, but it kind of transitions better into what I want to talk about next. So I'm going to talk about it here. Quan arrives with reinforcements, some of the Leinster Knights, and apparently his father gave him sanction to do this. He's like, my father wants to help Sigurd too. I want to help Sigurd. And, even though we're fighting against Granvale, this continental superpower, I and he will take that responsibility and deal with the consequences because we feel so strongly about this cause. Now, Ethlyn has a little bit of a moment here where she talks about how they brought their daughter Ethlyn into battle. Now, it's a little bit more understandable than that because the plan was for Ethlyn to leave before they actually saw any fighting. So I get that. That's okay. And apparently Sigurd has been dragging around a baby this entire time too. So, maybe it's not as big of a deal in this world as I'm making it out to be, but that just seems so goddamn stupid, right? And people make fun of that. This is the low-hanging fruit. I'm not the first person to criticize this plot point, nor will I be the last, but it just seems so dumb. The justification they give is that she was really upset and crying that Ethlyn was leaving without her, so they didn't want to leave her behind, so they took her with them. Again, wasn't supposed to see combat, so kind of okay, I guess, but still weird to me. It really just feels forced, like they wrote in this dumb excuse just to get Ethlyn into this conflict that's about to happen, which is that... I guess we'll get to that in a second. Ethlyn actually has a bit of a conversation or an argument, I guess, with Quan, where she wants to stay with him longer than they initially agreed on, and he's against it at first, but eventually he relents, and I think she initially wants to go fight with him, but he says, no, absolutely not, you have Ethlyn with you, I don't want you getting hurt, and eventually they compromise, like, she won't fight, but she will go with him longer than they initially agreed on. That's when Trevant shows up. And this is the moment that cemented him as my favorite Fire Emblem villain. Trevant redefines how I look at villains in Fire Emblem now because of how well he's handled in this scene. And in later parts as well. But here he makes his big impression. So I'll stop beating around the bush and I'll say exactly what happens. Trevant shows up and has decided that he's going to ambush Quan in the desert. And I guess Leinster and Thracia have been fighting for a really long time. Would have loved to have more context on that, but apparently that's the case. Thracia's wanted to reconquer, to use Quan's words, the land that Leinster now occupies. So, and Trevant appears and says, Thracia's destiny is ripe for the taking, and they are just going to kill Quan and all of his men, and presumably Ethlyn. Quan sees what's happening, starts freaking out, tells Ethlyn to get the hell out of here, because apparently the Thracia warriors will spare no one, they will kill women and children, and I think to use his exact words, they're no more than easy targets to them. And he also actually uses the hyena comparison that I mentioned in Chapter 3, although I think that one was from the other translation. So, it's just funny that this common idea keeps coming back. Quan kind of explains how this happened. They decided that, Quan that is, decided that because Thracia has been so desperate to get their land, that taking all of Leinster's knights to go help Sigurd was a mistake. So they left half of them behind, including Finn and Quan's dad, to basically guard Leinster. And they took the other half up to help Sigurd. They thought, okay, well, that'll make sure that Trevant can't attack Leinster while we're gone. But Instead, what Trevant decided to do that Quan didn't even consider the possibility of is instead of attacking Leinster, he would attack Quan directly, which, they're in a desert, which slows their movement to an absolute crawl, so they're able to catch up to them. They all have horse slayers, and this doesn't play out in the cutscene. Turn by turn, you have to watch as the Thracian Draco Knights kill all of them, including Quan and Ethlin, who you've been attached to, presumably, for, the entire game. They were with you since chapter 1, or prologue, I should say. And they're gone now. And you have to watch it play out in real time. It doesn't take the easy way out and just do it in a cutscene like with Madir in prologue or something, It's something else. It's a really great moment. It's regarded as one of the best in the game, even the series. And it further solidifies, you're going to hear me say this a lot, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but this grim atmosphere that just pervades this entire chapter. And at first it was kind of nebulous, like, oh, they're kind of uneasy, but there's nothing really concrete to be nervous about or to be sad about. It just, everyone's kind of off. But now you have a concrete reason, like, yes, shit is getting real, things are going very, very bad, and this is the sort of the beginning of the end of Sigurd's group, Quan and Ethlin being the first to die, and of course, unfortunately, not the last. I want to spend some time here talking about villains in stories, because this is something I mentioned a couple times, that Trevant is my favorite in the series, and I think that part of the reason that I want to do this podcast is to inform and organize my own thinking on narrative and what it means to have a good narrative and what I personally like in stories and in character writing. So I want to spend some time talking about what I think makes a good villain right here at the start of the podcast. And then as it goes on, see if that changes at all, or if I can apply that in new ways, or if it stays the same. That there's value in that too. So I think that there are 4 key traits that can contribute to making a good villain. I think that ideally you would have more than 1, at least 2. The best typically that I've found have 3. But if there's a villain that really excels in just 1, that can work too. But they need to be really, really good at it. I don't think I've ever met anyone that has all 4. But there is one that comes close, and I'll talk about that as we get further on. So the first trait is kind of the one that I think a lot of stories go for as like a cop-out, which is just the sympathetic villain. Do you understand where they're coming from? Do they have understandable motivations? And do they have reasons for acting the way that they do that make sense and are consistent with the character? And I say that this is used a lot of the time as a cop-out because a lot of bad villains will just be evil, but then you'll have a soppy or a sappy backstory thrown onto them to kind of like, oh, he was, had a terrible childhood, and that's why he turned into Hitler or something. And I'm not saying that like childhood trauma can't cause you to be, to make different decisions later on in life. Obviously, that's true, but it shows when it's not it's not a part of the character, when it's kind of thrown on as patchwork over flimsy motivations, and it definitely shows. But good villains that fall into this category are some of the best ever. When they're done well, they're done really, really well. I guess I should differentiate, because having understandable motivations and being sympathetic are not necessarily the same thing. You can see a character's thought process and be, on the same page. All right, I can understand how they reached that decision, but that it still doesn't make sense. It's still not like a sympathetic thing to do. A good example, and my mind is drawing blanks for anything outside of Fire Emblem and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, so I'm going to use a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure example. Kira from Part 4 is not sympathetic. He's a serial killer and a psychopath. But you can understand what he wants and his motivations, his actions through the lens of his motivation of wanting a quiet life all make sense for the most part, except for when he obviously, I guess, like, the fact that he is doing these things is contradictory to that. Like, the fact that he is a serial killer who wants to be left alone is contradictory. But everything that he does to cover up his actions, that all makes sense through that lens. But he's obviously not a sympathetic villain. Okay, I got one. It's a bit of a normie one, but it's still a good one. Thanos from Marvel, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is obviously misguided in what he wanted to do, but you can understand and sympathize with how he got to that point. His planet was devastated by lack of resources, and he came to the conclusion, alright, well, I need to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else, even if it means doing these horrible, monstrous things. I'm still benefiting the world, or the universe, as a whole, by doing all these things. And obviously, a lot has been said about his, why didn't he just double all the resources, or make infinite resources, or make it so that no one in the galaxy needs resources anymore, make it so that people don't need to eat to survive. All of these other things that he could have done. But putting all that aside, lack of judgment, and I think you could say that, like, that's just his single-mindedness and lack of ability to think laterally kind of coming through. But you can understand why he's doing what he's doing. You don't have to agree with it, but you can get where he's coming from. The second trait is intimidation factor. Does the villain scare you? Do they make it seem like, man, the main character is going to have a really hard time going up against them? They're really tough, they're really strong, and you want to root for the main character because they feel like the underdog. They're not just some loser who can't accomplish anything, because then there's no tension, there's no drama, because you know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, a lot of the time, implicitly, yeah, the good guy's going to win, but in the narrative, it feels different than that, because it's possible that they're going to lose because this guy's so strong, even if you know from your outside knowledge that that's probably not going to happen. One of the best examples of this that I can think of is Darth Vader from the Star Wars series, the original trilogy. And a lot of Star Wars villains actually are really good about this. But Darth Vader in particular is set up as this commanding figure, this, even visually he is all, don't take this out of context, but he's all black juxtaposed against the white stormtroopers, and even, the predominantly white outfit of Princess Leia, and the halls of the Tantive where you first meet him, and it creates this imposing sense of who he is. Of course, you see him kill people without thinking. You see him force choke his supposed allies. You see him, I say defeat, but I guess, Obi-Wan kind of let himself get killed, but he defeats Obi-Wan, who's been set up as this wise Jedi Master, and he really feels like a threat. He doesn't feel like someone who's going to get jobbed halfway through the first movie or whatever, And he doesn't. He does get defeated by a surprise attack from Han Solo, but he's not just going to go away. He comes back later. He comes back in the second and third movies, and he never really loses. I mean, the Emperor kills him, but that's because he, obviously, another great example from Star Wars is the Emperor. But, these imposing figures that really feel like, yes, the protagonist is going to have a hard time taking these guys down. They feel threatening, they feel ominous, because it's not going to be easy to beat them. The third trait, and I think this kind of ties in with the last one, especially you can argue for the past couple of villains, are they fun to hate? Do they do things that make your blood boil? Do they get really under your skin and just do things that make them come across as really evil and like they need to be taken down, because that encourages you to root for the protagonist even more. Do you want the protagonist to win not just because it's a story where you care about the protagonist and are invested in them doing well, but also because you're invested in seeing this guy go down, or this girl go down? Examples of that trait, I would say, again, Darth Vader and the Emperor from Star Wars. Again, a lot of Star Wars villains do this. I'll use an example from Fire Emblem, actually. The Black Knight is a really good example of both this trait and the last one, of being intimidating and really easy to hate because of the things that they do. I won't go into spoilers until we get to Path of Radiance, because that wouldn't really be fair of me, but he does some real messed up shit, and he establishes himself as an intimidating, imposing, and hateable figure for Ike to eventually defeat. And then the final trait is charisma. Are they just fun? Are they a great personality? Do you enjoy just seeing them on screen? The Joker from Batman, great example. Kefka from Final Fantasy VII, or Final Fantasy VI, my bad. These are villains that I think there are reasons why they have stood the test of time, you know? And like I said, I tried to isolate ones that I think really excel in one particular area, but most good villains have multiple of these traits and are good at multiple of these traits. So it's kind of hard to just pinpoint one, like a villain that represents just one, because if it's a good villain, they probably don't just represent one. I think the best villains represent 2, sometimes 3, and I've never seen one that I have found to represent all 4, except there is one that comes close, and it is Dio from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. He has these really powerful vampiric powers in part 1, and then in part 3 he gets an incredibly busted stand ability. He does so many things that make you hate him. The infamous how many breads have you eaten in your life is a meme, obviously, but it also establishes, man, this guy is messed up. He's killed all these people and he's comparing them to just eating breakfast in the morning, you know? He is obviously a great personality. He has so much charm and charisma, and, you know, all the memes of him should explain that. I don't need to explain that any further. And the only one that he kind of lacks and is, you know, more questionable is the sympathetic backstory. He has one. I don't know if it's really fair to say that makes him sympathetic, because I feel like, I know a thing or two about psychology. I'm a psych major. I'm in grad school for a psych-related program. So I know a thing or two about psychology, and to me, him becoming that level of sociopathic at such a young age isn't proportional to what he had to go through, but we don't know that for sure. And also, obviously, there's an exception to every rule. I'm sure that this is something that could realistically happen in real life. It's just not super common. And so I think it's hard to justify and say, oh, well, he's this messed up because his dad was an alcoholic. You know, that's why he killed his adopted brother's dog in the first week or whatever out of revenge. You know, it's I don't know. Maybe I'm putting my foot in my mouth here, but I think that that's a stretch if I've ever seen one. But it is there. It is an argument that you could make, and the other 3 are there in spades. So I think that is the closest I've ever seen anyone come to fitting into this mold, fitting into all 4 of these traits. I wanted to bring this up because I think it's something that I'm going to be coming back to as I go through the villains of this series, and as I help myself to understand what I look for in a villain. And I wanted to use it to justify why I like Trevant so much, because he establishes, right now, 2 of these traits very well. He's extremely, extremely hateable right now, because he's just launched this sneak attack on characters we've cared about, one of which is a woman and who has a child, like is carrying a child with her. obviously Ethlyn's capable of defending herself, but the fact that she has a child is just, and they still do. In fact, I think, although this kind of depends on the translation, I think when they find Altena, one of the Thracia soldiers is like, should we kill her? And she's like a 2-year-old baby, and Trevant has to be like, no, I'll take her back with me. And and he wants to use her for her own he wants to use her for his own nefarious purposes. And then he also very clearly establishes himself as an intimidating threat, because, you do have to actually fight these guys after they kill Quan and Ethlyn, and they're not easy to take down, but the fact that they had the foresight and the strategy needed to launch this attack is, it sets them up as being intimidating and threatening. And all the hyena imagery and the fact that they are, almost wild animals in who they will attack further establishes that image. Later on, we will also get a sympathetic element worked in there, but for right now, that's pretty much all we have about Trevant. But he does get some sympathetic backstory, and that makes me love him even more. But this established him as just being this monster that I really wanted to see go down. And of course, Sigurd doesn't get the chance to do it, so eventually when he gets his comeuppance way in late chapter 9, or like mid chapter 9, I guess, it feels very earned, and it feels right, it feels good. Alright, I'm going to speed through some of the rest of this. Now that Sigurd has conquered the first castle, he's going through the desert, and there are meteor mages all around, and this is using the terrain to its advantage. Slogging through the desert is a pain in the ass, and I always hate it, and desert maps in general are going to be some of my least favorite as we go through this series, but I think that this one's okay because it's only for part of the map, and it at least gives you something interesting to do while you're traversing through it. In this case, avoiding the meteor mages is difficult, and it's fun to try to avoid their range and make sure that everyone's healed up, and then, have Aaron fly around and deal with them. You kind of have your own various ways to approach this trap, I guess, and take it apart however you choose to. Eventually, you get to the castle in the desert and conquer it, and this is where Sigurd finds out about Ethlyn and Quan, and he's understandably distraught. And again, this is kind of where we start to see that grim atmosphere really form completely. He's lost in despair here. He's very upset, and he feels so guilty that they died basically for his sake. And, his sister and his best friend going down for him, that's a lot. And he's understandably upset by it. We cut to Reptor here, who has an aside about how he doesn't think Arvis is going to hold up his end of the deal, but he kind of writes it off. He says, no, I'm probably wrong. And he wanders off, and then one of Arvis's aides kind of mutters to himself, or to herself, alright, well, get ready to spring the trap, or whatever. So, obviously, Reptor has a right to be a little worried about Arvis. This is the last approach on the final castle of Velthamer, and there are a few dozen conversations here. Not really, but every female character except for Aideen has 3 possible conversations here. Aideen doesn't have any, and I think it's because she had a lot between Claude in this chapter and then 3 last chapters, so I think she's had her fair share of lover conversations. I'm pretty sure every male character gets at least 1, and then most get 2. I don't think any of them get 3, though. So I just went through, and I'm going to say, for every character, who they have the conversation with, and then I read all their conversations, and anything interesting I just jotted down. Obviously, I did not get all these conversations, because each character can only be paired with 1 other character per playthrough. So, I guess I'll talk about the only ones I did get were Lachesis and Beowulf, and then I would have gotten Alec and Sylvia, but I killed Sylvia off already. I'm pretty sure I talked about that. But yeah, I killed Sylvia off. So Till2 has conversations with Azel, Claude, and Lex. I paired her with Lewin, so she didn't get any of these. And all of them are basically just saying the same thing. Oh, you can't fight your father, because now they're marching on Reptor. And all of them tell her to go to Selyse, which presumably she does. Even though technically she can go up and fight Reptor, but I don't know if that's like non-canon or whatever. I have no idea. Some of the story beats in this kind of get weird. Aaron has one with Lewin, Arden, and Noish. I'm pretty sure most of them, or at least a couple of them, mention that their kids are in Selyse, and the Lewin one is just really cute, where she says that being with Lewin has been her lifelong dream, and she's just really happy. And she's not going to go dying and ruining this happiness that she has now. It's really sweet. I like it. Sylvia has one with Claude, Lewin, and Alec. The Alec one is funny because it implies that her kids were conceived by accident, which, I mean, obviously there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it is an interesting bit of characterization that Alec doesn't strap his shit, and that Sylvia is kind of blaming him for it, and they get into like a little squabble about it. It's nothing serious, obviously, but, you know, it's funny. Lachesis has one with Beowulf, Noish, and Du, and I got the one with Beowulf. So, no matter what, she goes to Leinster, I believe. She's concerned about Eldagon's kids, Ares. Does Eldagon have a daughter? I don't remember. I have to go back and look at that conversation, but she talks about how she's concerned with Ares and how Sigurd apparently is also concerned about Ares, and nothing really comes of that, I don't think, but it just further name drops Ares. The Beowulf one here is infamous, and this is something that I was talking about in episode, it would have been episode 3, I think? No, yeah, 3, where we first got Lachesis, and it implies that Beowulf, well, I mean, it explicitly says that Beowulf knows some kind of secret that she's been keeping from him, and the implication that a lot of people seem to take away from this is that she cheated on him with Finn, I think, is the general consensus, and it's not hard to see why. I mean, he did talk about Leinster, and I think he even mentions Finn specifically, and then segues into, I know the secret you've been keeping from me, or whatever. So, the connection there is very easy to draw, but it's not explicit, which is good. Aira has one with Lex, Holland, and Arden, in which Holland reveals their history together. I remember them being childhood friends. I did not remember that she did not know about that until just now, but apparently she doesn't find out about it until their Chapter 5 conversation. And Brigid has one with Alec, Jamk, and Midir. In the Jamk and Midir ones, she is slightly jealous of Aideen because she knows that Jamk and Midir had like a kind of romantic history with her. So she's kind of feeling a little self-conscious about that, but both of them assure her, no, I'm with you now, and you're the one that I love, and there's no one else. And that's all. I guess I'll briefly just say, Till2 is with Lewin, Fury is with Azel, Sylvia is unpaired and in fact dead. Actually, she got paired with Alec, but is now dead. Lachesis is paired with Beowulf, Aira is paired with Noish, and then Brigid, well, we'll talk about Brigid in a minute, but my intention was to have her be unpaired, and if I ended up pairing her by accident, I was going to kill her off, which did end up happening, but I'll talk more about that in a second. Actually, I'll talk about it right now, I guess. She fell in love with Lex as I was getting all these conversations and making sure that all my inheritance was set to go. That's what I was doing during this time. I was making sure that everyone's inheritance was in order. This is where the desert starts to grate on me a lot, because there's nothing really to do anymore. All the meteor mages have been taken out. I think there's one that you can potentially get into the range of, but he's really easy to get rid of. So now it's just walking through the desert and making sure you don't accidentally step in Reptor's range, so because he'll just fucking murder you because he has a holy weapon. But it's just really tedious. So yeah, this map, the desert section, is not my favorite part, that's for sure. Once you engage with Reptor for the first time, Arvis will switch sides and turn yellow and start attacking Reptor. And Reptor kind of says, "Oh, you've betrayed me." Reptor is actually very dangerous because he has a holy weapon, a ranged holy weapon, Mjolnir. I almost called it Thor Hammer because that's what it's been called in the old translations, which I think is a cool name, but whatever. He hits really hard, hits on resistance, which is usually lower, and can attack at range, and has really high skill, so it's unlikely that he'll miss because it gives him plus 20 skill. So he's really hard to take down, but you can eventually do it. I think I did it with Lewin, but yeah, because Lewin has weapon triangle advantage over him, so it was pretty easy. Once you kill once you kill Reptor, Sigurd can go and talk to the person in charge of Veltimer, one of Arvis's aides, and she says that Arvis is preparing a celebration in Sigurd's honor to bring Sigurd back, celebrate his return. But when he goes there, he finds out that it is in fact a trap, and Arvis has betrayed him and has decided to just lure him in so that he can more conveniently finish him off and catch him off guard. Before he does this, though, he brings out Deirdre as sort of I don't know what it's supposed to be. He briefly mentions that he has a wife, Princess Deirdre, and Sigurd reacts, as you would expect him to, "Princess Deirdre? That's crazy." And he says, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll show her to you so that you can have, this nice sight before you die or whatever." And I don't know if he knows. It's really unclear if he's aware of what he's doing. He seems to, because as soon as Sigurd starts to freak out and say, "Hey, you're my," and he's about to say wife, but he gets cut off, Arvis interrupts him, and I can only imagine that's because he doesn't want him to say it, but it's also implied that he doesn't have anything against Sigurd, so why would he bring out Deirdre just to taunt him like this? I don't know. It's very unclear. Either way, if he knows, then why did he bring her out, and why is he cutting him off at the exact right moments? And if he does know, then why does he say that he doesn't have anything against Sigurd and yet brings out his brainwashed wife to taunt him right before he fucking murders him? There's no great way to look at this, and I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense in either scenario. Sigurd loses his mind, as you can imagine. He's been through hell. He lost Deirdre. He lost his country. He had to fight through Granvale. His dad died. He had to separate himself from his son. And now, just before he's being about to be killed, he finds out that his wife has been under his nose the whole time with Arvis, and he flips out. And this is the first. In this game, they use all caps to signify someone screaming. And this is the first instance we see Sigurd screaming, which is a good juxtaposition to how calm and collected he normally is. Deirdre, as she's being escorted away, seems to get a little inkling of what's going on because she wants to stay with Sigurd. She wants a little bit more time to talk to Sigurd. But of course Arvis says, "No, that's not okay. I gotta get you out of here." And then Arvis kills Sigurd. And this is regarded as one of the most poignant moments in the entire series, understandably so, because nothing like this has ever really happened before or since. The protagonist loses, and spoiler alert, we're about to get a flash forward to 17 years from now, and nothing's they lost, and the world went to shit for years before eventually Seliph, of course, takes up the torch of his father and wins, but too little too late, honestly. And this is really dark. It's not often that you see something like this in a Fire Emblem game. In fact, this is pretty much the only time we see it. Again, I guess Three Houses really, I don't want to say rip this off, but it was very similar in terms of how it handled that plot. But there's a really grim little epilogue where it talks about how all these people died. It goes over who you lost, and then also obviously Quan, Ethlin, and Sigurd, who canonically die. The music here is really poignant because it's a sad remix of all the map themes up to that point, so it's kind of like a retrospective of like, this is how far we've come, these are all the things that we did along the way, and now it's all gone, now it's all for naught. So this is widely regarded as being one of the best narrative moments in the entire series, and I agree. I think that it's genuinely moving and sad, and it's unexpected. Unfortunately, it's also one of the most spoiled plot twists in any Fire Emblem game because it kind of became a meme. I don't really know why. I mean, Sigurd gets burned to death, and people make jokes about how Sigurd got, like, barbecued or grilled up or whatever, and it's really morbid, honestly, but I mean, it's funny, but it's in, like, a really dark way. And I also think that it unfortunately takes away the experience that a lot of people would have seeing this unspoiled. I, for one, went in knowing that this was going to happen. And it still made an impact. It still felt powerful, but it just wasn't the same as I think it could have been. You know, I'm finding myself kind of like I felt like I would have more to say about this because it's just such an iconic moment in the series. So I was expecting myself to be able to go on and on and on about this. I thought this was going to be one of the longest episodes. I think it's going to be just about average, but I think it's because that most of this speaks for itself, right? Like, I don't need to tell you, if you've played the game, how impressive this is and how, I guess I shouldn't say subtle, but how well done and well executed the build-up of tension throughout the chapter is, and the twist at the end, and the way that Trevant comes in and messes everything up. These are all things that just kind of people know about and people talk about, so it's part of the collective consciousness of the fandom, so I don't think that it's... I think that it's worth highlighting exactly how it does this mechanically, and I meant like the narrative mechanics, but also through gameplay mechanics too. But I don't think that it's something that you can explain it how it's done, but you can't really explain how it makes you feel unless you experience it yourself. So if for some reason you've listened to this far into the podcast and you haven't played this game before, definitely do so. At the very least, play Gen 1. Gen 2 is a lot more standard. I wouldn't say it's a bad story by any means, at least not from what I remember, but it is definitely a lot more bog standard in terms of the content and emotional engagement, I guess. There's still some of that, but more akin to what you would expect out of an average Fire Emblem game. But Gen 1 is genuinely something special. Okay, so before we move on to our map gauntlet, I want to talk a little bit about inheritance. So I've mentioned before that stats and holy blood and growths are influenced by the parents of the children. The mothers are always the same, the dads can change. But what I haven't mentioned before, I don't think, is that the items are also passed down. So whatever items, for instance, say Ethlin has in her inventory, I think I have talked about this before, will get passed down to Leaf. Normally it's the mother passes down stuff to the daughter, father passes down stuff to the son. For Quan and Ethlin, and Brigid and her husband, those gender roles are swapped. So, I want to briefly go through and just talk about like the major highlights of what I inherited so you guys can see what I'm working with going into Gen 2. So, Sigurd passes down his items to Seliph, and he had on him, of note, 50 kill plus Silver Sword. I think by the end it had about 70 kills, so Seliph is going to be rocking 20 crit right off the bat with it, which is nice. And he has 4 rings. He has the Barrier Ring, Shield Ring, Power Ring, and Paragon Ring. So, you know, the stat boosting rings are just stuff that Sigurd kind of ended up with just by killing bosses because he's the best boss killer. And then the Paragon Ring I gave him specifically just so that Seliph can get that experience going as early as possible, because my first playthrough I ended up not giving Seliph enough kills because he was kind of lagging behind for me just because he wasn't on a horse and I didn't do his inheritance well. So he didn't end up promoting until chapter 10. And I don't want that. So I definitely want him to get promoted as early as possible. I might not do it in chapter 6, but probably by early chapter 7, he will be promoted at the very latest. Aideen passing down items to Lana is going to be giving her the Warp, Fortify, Physic, Rescue, Restore, and Return. I also wanted to give the Mend, but I screwed up my money management a little bit, and I actually wasn't able to get... I think I had to give up Mend to get Physic on Lana, and I don't think I was able to get it on anyone else because I don't think that Nana can use it at base. I'm pretty sure it's B rank, and Nana has C rank at base. So basically, if I didn't give it to her, I don't think I was going to be able to get it on anyone. So the men's staff just kind of got lost. And actually, I think I might have given the men's staff to Nana. I don't know. Something like that. Claude is not passing down anything. He does not have anything in his inventory except for the broken Valkyria staff. So, I mean, Lester is going to be his kid, and he doesn't need anything except, like, nothing that Claude can give him would be any use to him, I guess, maybe except some stat boosting rings, but doesn't matter. Aira is passing down the silver sword and the silver blade. Now, Larcy doesn't need both of those, but one of them is going to be for Ulster. Noish is Ulster's dad, and he cannot use either the silver sword or the silver blade. Even after promotion, he only has B swords, which means that he cannot purchase either of them from the pawn shop, which means that Ulster will not be able to inherit them directly. So he's going to have to... Larcy is going to have to sell either the silver sword or the silver blade. I'm not sure which one yet. And Ulster will pick one of them up so he can use it. I mean, Ulster can use it at base because he'll have the Odo Holy Blood, so that's not a problem. It's just that I wasn't able to pass it directly to him. Noish is going to give the skill ring for critical and an armor slayer just for some utility in killing armor knights. But also he's going to pass on the Night Ring. The Night Ring, I mean, I killed off Sylvia, so Lean is not going to be around, so I couldn't inherit it to her. So I'm just giving it to someone who I think makes good use out of it in the first chapter of the game. I could have given it to a few other people. Most of them probably make better use of it than Ulster does anyway, like Seliph, Arthur, stuff like that. But it'll still be nice for someone early on to have it. And then at my earliest opportunity, I'll probably pass it on to Sylvia. No, Sylvia? Layla. There we go. Beowulf is only passing down the Brave Sword. I mean, they will. I think they're passing down other items, but it's mostly just mundane stuff like steel swords and iron weapons, stuff like that. Beowulf is passing down the Brave Sword to Diarmid. I wanted someone early on to have it. He makes good use out of it. He's going to have a really high strength growth, so if he quads with it, it'll be really good. Some people like to give it to Seliph. I think that's fine, but honestly, I would probably rather have him use the Silver Sword anyway, because he's probably going to kill stuff with a crit and a hit. So I'm not super worried about Seliph's ability to kill things. Erin has a bunch of stuff. She's passing down the Wing Slayer, the Shield Sword, the Thief Sword, Bolt Sword, and Horse Slayer. Thea is going to have Azel as her dad, so the Bolt Sword's just to have fun with, doing magic attacks at range. I hope she can use it at base. I'm actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm not sure if she can. I'll have to check that. And then the Thief Sword is just because she's going to be fighting pirates who are going after villages a lot. Shield Sword is to help her durability, and then Wing Slayer and Horse Slayer to help her deal with high mobility enemies that she might be able to get to faster than your other units. Azel is only passing down the magic ring to Sed, who his dad is. I think he might be passing down like a fire and a thunder tome or something, but nothing special. Tailtu is actually grabbing an Elwind and the speed and pursuit rings because I have major Tinny bias and I'm giving her everything I can. I'm probably gonna have to give the pursuit ring to Leaf at some point, but I want Tinny to have it for at least a little while, and then once Leaf promotes I can give it back to her maybe, because I really want her to be able to get double attacks and kill enemies. Elwind is because normally she would only join with Thunder Tomes, and Thunder weighs her down a lot. Elwind does not weigh her down very much at all, and with high speed she gets from Lewin's blood. That's going to be nice to have. Lewin is passing down Forseti and the leg ring. I actually do like the leg ring on Arthur, at least for a little bit, just because he will eventually be able to get on a horse, but before that he's going to have some trouble keeping up with the rest of your units, and Forseti makes his combat really, really good, so I'm fine with giving him this little bit of investment. And that is it. I don't think I missed anyone. Brigid and Sylvia are not passing down anything, unfortunately, because they are deceased. I guess technically Brigid's alive. Maybe not in this canon or whatever, but she is alive and kicking in Thracia. So, but yeah, that's what my team looking at Gen 2 is going to look like. I'm going to check the Fee thing right now with the bolt sword and everything. Because Fee doesn't have any, like if Azel's her dad, she doesn't get any holy blood that will let her use higher level swords. So if she joins with like C swords or something and the bolt sword's a B sword, that's going to be a problem. I'm pretty sure I checked though, and I'm pretty sure bolt sword is C, but now I gotta look into it. Okay, yeah, it is a C sword, and I'm pretty sure C is the lowest rank that anyone can have in anything in this game if they can use a weapon at all. So that's fine. Alright, moving on to our map gauntlet. Unfortunately, as much as I like to praise the narrative story side of things in this map, the gameplay just isn't that remarkable. You're really just going in a straight line. The only time you have any incentive to fight on multiple fronts or hurry or anything is obviously Byron saving the villages, and then there's a group of enemies attacking you from behind that you have to deal with. But by and large, by the time you get to the first castle, you're done. You don't have to do anything like that. There's no incentive to hurry. I mean, first time players might think that they can save Quan, so they might want to hurry with that, but you will quickly realize that that's just not possible. And fun fact, if you do somehow manage to save him, like if you hack the game or something, because you can't kill the Thracia Draco Knights, they're yellow, so you literally cannot engage in combat with them. You I guess what you could do is you can make it so that the Knights are invincible or something like that, and the Thracia Draco Knights will all die. If they manage to get to, the green units manage to get to the castle where, like in the middle of the desert, Fenora, I think it's called, and capture it, then that soft locks the game, because you can't capture a green castle. You can only capture red castles. So it won't register it as something that you can do, and then the game doesn't progress until after you capture the first castle, or the second castle. So there's just nothing you can do. I mean, obviously that's not going to happen. You would have to get astronomically, I guess, lucky or unlucky, depending on your perspective, to have that happen. Because they can die. I'm pretty sure they're not hard, or the Leinster Knights can dodge and stuff. I'm pretty sure they're not hard-coded to just always lose. I'm pretty sure it's just the odds are very, very much not in their favor. So, theoretically, I think it's possible, but, you know, you're never going to see it. Anyway, my point is that there's just no reason to do anything. No enemies come at you. I guess once you're moving through the desert, you might have to be careful about the meteor mages, but you can have Aaron deal with them, or you can just deal with it because they're not that powerful. There's nothing that they can do that you can't heal off. Maybe some of your low-res units, if they stand in range of both attacks and get unlucky enough to get hit by both of them, then maybe they can die. But then you just reset the turn, so it doesn't matter. Yeah, this map isn't very engaging gameplay-wise. It's just, you go in a straight line, you capture castles, and there's an annoying slog through the desert, which I don't like. There are some really tough bosses, which I guess is kind of both a good and a bad thing. I don't like how it forces you to use certain units, more or less. I mean, theoretically, Lex could beat him, or, you know, maybe someone like Holland who has weapon triangle advantage. But if you want a decent shot at taking these guys out, then you're going to have to use all the holy weapon users. But I get that that is part of the point. It's gameplay story integration, and I do want to overall count that as a net positive, even when I don't necessarily like the specific instances of it. So I'll count that as a positive, that I think it's establishing that these guys are so powerful that you can only take them on with other major Holy Blood having characters. That's fine. And as I suspected, unless I'm missing something big here, it has been a little while since I've actually played the map. It's been a couple weeks now, I think. I haven't really had the time to sit down and record, but I don't think there's anything really noteworthy to talk about outside of all of that for the gameplay. And for that reason, Chapter 3 is still our reigning champ for Gen 1. And I think that that's something to celebrate, because a lot of people consider Gen 1 and Gen 2 to be almost separate games. They're so different in terms of their tone and their the scale. Like, the maps continue to get bigger and bigger. We don't reset to a prologue-sized map in the second half of the game. So the maps in Gen 1 are generally a lot smaller. And for that reason, and all the characters are different, bosses are different, there's a whole different story. So in terms of in some context, you could argue that Gen 1 is its own separate thing. So in a way, we have our first winner of a game, which is FE4 Gen 1 Chapter 3 Lionhearted Eldegon. And I don't think that that's really too much of an accomplishment, because there's not, I don't think, a huge amount of support for the other maps. I don't think 1 and 2 are very well liked. I think that 4 is kind of mixed. I think that 5 people mostly only talk about for the story. And then Prologue, I've seen argued, is actually a really good introduction to the game's mechanics, which is fine, that's good, it should be. But I just don't think that it's a very good standalone map, which unfortunately I cannot replay these games for the first time. Like, I'm going in inherently from the perspective of I've played all of these games before. There are some maps that I actually haven't played before. I think only in Thracia there's a couple of Gaiden maps that I've never done, so those are going to be my first time experiencing some of those maps, so you can look forward to that. But for the most part, I'm not going to be judging these maps based on how well they teach you the game mechanics, unless it's done really well. Like, really, really well. So I don't think that that's a huge consideration for me for Prologue. So I think Chapter 3 kind of just wins by process of elimination. It's the least worst map, and it's still fun. It's still a good map. It has some good stuff going for it, but it's not stellar. And I will, to be clear, I will be comparing it to Gen 2 maps. So if Chapter 6 is better than Chapter 3, then Chapter 6 will be our new reigning champ for FE4. I was just saying more, it was like half joking, honestly, but I just want to have a winner. I'm excited to have our first map gauntlet winner of the game, but we'll see. Gen 3, I keep saying Gen. Chapter 3 might be it. I don't know. I don't recall any other... I guess I'll phrase it this way. When I first started up this game for this replay, I remember thinking, I like Chapter 3. I think Chapter 3 is a good map. I'm excited to go back to it and replay it, and it lived up to that. I can't think of any other maps that I actually specifically remember being fond of in this game, other than maybe Chapter 7, but even that has its problems. So Chapter 3 might take the whole thing, I don't know. So we'll see. I'm going on 2 hours now, although that's going to be cut way, way short because there's a bunch of stuff I'm going to cut out. But I'm going pretty long is my point here, so I hope everyone has a good rest of your day. I don't know when I'm going to get this put up, but hopefully it'll be reasonably soon after I finish recording it. So I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye-bye.